Welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. I am Greg Tito, and I'm joined by Mr. Chris Perkins. Hello.
Greetings.
How are you?
Good, good. It's on this day that we're recording this, it's a little smoky outside, but I have no complaints.
Well, that's good. And this is a good segue because on this segment where we talk through little bits of lore about Dungeons and Dragons for use in your game or just because it's fun to know, some type of burning and or smoke might be of use to the people of 10 Towns.
Indeed. Yes, yes. For those who don't know, 10 Towns is a very, very cold place.
And even colder now in Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden, which is set to be available to everyone on September 15th. 2 covers are available, one of which depicts a very snowy-looking creature, but we'll get to that at another time. But we're going to talk about what is going on in Icewind Dale in the settlements there, which are called 10 Towns because there are 10 settlements, right?
Yes, yes. There are towns, of which there are 10. They're sort of clustered in the center of this realm called Icewind Dale, which is separated from the rest of the northern reaches of the realms by a wall of towering tooth-like mountains known as the spine of the world. So it's a very, very isolated place. And 10 Towns really, some of the towns are a good size, but some of them are really just ramshackle little villages. But they all get the name town, and there are 10 of them. They've all got their own names on top of that. And most of them are congregated around 3 big lakes. There's one town that is not on a lake shore.
And how did they get founded? Why did people start congregating here in such a desolate place?
That's an excellent question. And tracing all the way back to early lore, the towns emerged kind of naturally from very small, humble beginnings. They were mining encampments. They were camps for furriers and visiting traders. They were camps used by mountain climbers and frontiers folk. So they all started off really, really small, but then as the people continued to dwell there, they realized the hostile creatures of this domain and other threats necessitated the building of walls or fortifications or sturdier homesteads. And as more frontier folk realized that there's potentially wealth in iron and minerals and gems and gold or whatever to be had up there, the settlements just sort of blossomed and grew. The largest of the settlements is sort of the trade hub for all of 10 Towns, and it's called Bryn Shander. It is also the place where all the other townsfolk can retreat to if their towns become overwhelmed, because Bryn Shander has actually sturdy, thick walls surrounding it and is the most defensible of all the towns. For those who don't know, 10 Towns has been around in D&D since first edition. They were explored in sort of the first real great detail in a product called Volo's Guide to the North, written by the father of the Forgotten Realms, Ed Greenwood, way back when. And it was a small paperback book. And Icewind Dale was a section in that book. But of course, where Icewind Dale and 10 Towns became most prominent was in the Dritz novels by R.A. Salvatore, which sort of tells the tale of this drow who comes up to the surface, finds himself in 10 Towns, and is not welcome there, but nonetheless defends 10 Towners and protects them against a great threat, and becomes a legend in that part of the realms. Nice. And even to this day, and in Icewind Dale, we refer to Dritz Do'Urden and the memory the 10 Towners have of him and his companions who helped protect them when they needed help most.
Nice. I remember in previous conversations with Bob Salvatore that they just were like, hey, no one's written anything about what's happening in Icewind Dale yet, so go ahead and create your legends.
That's exactly why he used it, because very, very little had been written. It was a playground for him, and he could pretty much create stuff on the fly, which is, of course, a beautiful thing to be able to do in a shared world.
Exactly. Yeah. So, a lot of the assumptions that we have about Icewind Dale are from the R.A. Salvatore novels. The Crystal
Yes, and
Shard was the first
a
one.
lot of things that sort of came out of there, like the Crystal Shard itself, which was this sort of crystalline tower of evil, that resonates in Rime of the Frostmaiden. You kind of see, or you find little bits of it scattered here, there, and everywhere.
And the timeline is different in Rime of the Frostmaiden too, right? So that's about 100 years has passed since the events of the Crystal Shard.
Yeah, just over, because Crystal Shard was set, I think, around the area of like 1369 or thereabouts, and we're in 1492.
Okay, so like 120
or thereabouts.
Years.
Yeah. We don't lock Rime of the Frostmaiden to a specific year, but it's in basically that time period.
So a lot has changed since we visited. What is some of the newer developments, or how would you describe the current state of 10 towns in Icewind Dale now?
More isolated than ever. It has been a long time since the sun has risen above the southern peaks. And there's something supernatural going on that has sort of plunged Icewind Dale into everlasting night, which of course does not bode well for Icewind Dale's future. But people who live there aren't exactly sure what to do. Blizzards have cut off the mountain pass, the sea of moving ice, which is not easy to navigate in the best of times, is almost unnavigable now. The great glaciers to the east have these cold sweeping winds coming down off them. It's become quite unbearable. And so it looks like Icewind Dale might be doomed unless something is done.
How long ago has that the extra cold been?
We actually sort of alluded to it with a sentence in Sword Coast Adventures Guide, but it's been a couple of years. And I mean, magic has helped. 10-towners, unlike people of the real world, do have access to magic. And while magic users aren't everywhere, spellcasters aren't everywhere in Icewind Dale, it certainly comes in handy to be able to create fire and do other things to help sort of sustain existence in this particularly harsh time. But adventurers are needed more than ever.
Got it. And you mentioned Bryn Shander is like the capital city or capital town, or at least where they go to get defended. That's also where like the 10 Towns Council meets too, right?
That's correct. Each town appoints a leader who's elected to the position, and that leader has the title of town speaker. And whenever something affects the entire Icewind Dale or has an impact on all the communities, the speakers convene in Bryn Shander in the council hall to hash it out. Now, these meetings often devolve into petty arguments over things like fishing claims and territoriality. This town's boats are in our part of the lake. They're taking fish out of our part of the lake. So within 10 towns, there is a lot of enmity or animosity that's built up among the leaders. It sort of vacillates between at times just being friendly competitive to being a much more bitter rivalry.
They go from enemies to frenemies.
Yes, and of course, when times are tough, particularly in long winters that never seem to end, everybody's nerves are on edge, and it makes them even pricklier than they would normally be. But ostensibly, this group exists to basically safeguard the well-being of all of 10 towns.
So essentially, they like elect a mayor, and then that speaker goes and, is it a standing meeting, or is it something that's only called when there's emergencies, like you said?
They're supposed to see each other a number of times a year, but it's really the case where in actual practice, even though meetings are held almost every month, a number of speakers simply will not attend them all. Oh. And there's actually a couple speakers, for instance, Edgra Dermot of Duggan's Hole, who almost never goes to meetings. She just can't be bothered.
What Bryn Shander, I guess, is one of the most powerful, or at least has the most influence. Who's the speaker of Bryn Shander now?
The speaker of Bryn Shander is a young but wise beyond her years woman named Duvessa Shane. She was first sort of introduced or brought to the fore in a product that we released between 4th and 5th edition called Legacy of the Crystal Shard. It was sort of an edition agnostic adventure that we put out to kind of fill a gap between the two editions. And she has a prominent role to play in that adventure, and again appears in Rime of the Frostmaiden. And she has a good head on her shoulders.
Okay, sounds good. And then, what are some of the other more prominent towns and their leaders?
Well, one of the towns closest to Bryn Shander is on a lake called Mare Dualden, and it is the town of Targos. They are known for having the largest fishing fleet in 10 towns. They are also the only other settlement that has a wall on at least on its landward side. They can't obviously have much of a wall that goes out over the lake, although some of the wall does go over the lake. But Targos is a hard-working fishing town, basically. But its leader is newly appointed. It has changed since the last time we visited Icewind Dale. The old speaker retired or got tired of basically being in the position, which I can relate to as a president of a homeowners association. There's only so much energy you can give before it gets sucked out of you. So the new one is actually a fellow named Nerth, and Nerth Maxel Danar. And he's a bit of a creep, and he's got an allegiance to an organization that we've tapped before, and we've showcased before, and we've talked about before. But this organization has dark designs in Icewind Dale, and he's kind of like their front man.
What's the name of the organization?
The Zhentarim.
The Black Network.
The Black Network, yes, which is a kind of a shadowy organization that seeks to control all trade throughout Faerun. And Icewind Dale is vulnerable and ripe, and Nerth is conducting a number of operations and maneuvers to secure the Zhentarim's foothold.
This isn't the branch of the Zhentarim that we saw in Waterdeep Dragon Heist with Manshoon at the head, correct?
Correct.
So this is the
mainline Zhentarim.
So, creepy and not good, but not necessarily led by an evil clone.
Right. Yes. And the thing about 10 towns is you're kind of on your own up there. You can't really rely on support from south of the mountains. So you have to be sort of whatever resources you have or the resources you see around you. And so Nerth and others like him who seek to gain more power have to do it through influence and bribes and other means. They can't just, call the home office and expect reinforcements to show up on their doorstep.
And I imagined winged serpents don't fly very well in blizzards.
They do tend to get lost and battered around, yes, as they try to fly around. For those who don't know, that's the preferred. They're the carrier pigeons of the Zhentarim, are basically winged snakes. Now, Nerth does have some, but he uses them to communicate with his spies in 10 towns.
I see. Does he have any designs on different settlements? Is that something that players might be able to uncover?
Yes, in fact, what you discover is one of the town speakers, the speaker of the town of Goodmead, has died, and there's an election being held to replace him. And one of the candidates is basically one of Nerth's puppets.
Oh.
But you don't know which one that is.
And Goodmead, follows along 10 towns naming properties of it being exactly what the name means.
Goodmead is, of course, where 10 town. It's the settlement that produces this very popular mead that the people of 10 towns drink, sometimes to excess. But it's actually important to them. It's a key part of their economy, and it's a key part of their well-being, this sweet honey mead. And so there's this large mead hall that sort of dominates the skyline in Goodmead, that where you can hear the droning of bees, because of course bees produce the honey that goes into the mead, and so keeping these bees alive and nourished is sort of part of Goodmead's deal. Now, of course,
how's that possible? Not even just given the extra cold, but just the normal amount of cold that happens at Icewind Dale. Is it a hothouse? Is it a greenhouse?
Yeah, they basically heat it with fires and control, in ovens, and they Goodmead has the benefit of being one of the few towns that's near a forest. And forests are pretty scarce in Icewind Dale. There's two. There's the Forest of Lonelywood, and then there's this small little forest north of Goodmead, where at least they have ready access to wood, and they have loggers constantly going in there and dragging wood back to town. And so they're able. The challenge, of course, because of the weather, is just getting the mead to all the other settlements safely, and so that can be a challenge. But if the Zhentarim can control the mead flow in 10 towns, that's huge for them.
Yeah,
that will give them a tremendous amount of influence
and collateral, against the town.
Yes, yes, yeah. We can withhold shipments of this, and your taverns will dry out basically if you don't do what we say. So there's a lot at stake.
That's okay. Well, that is interesting. What you mentioned transportation through the cold. Like, how do people in 10 towns get around to the other settlements? Is it easy? Is it hard?
So most of the settlements are within about 5 miles of each other. So even in the worst inclement conditions, a person can trudge from one town to the next. The danger, of course, is there's no patrols. So if you do get lost, tough luck. If you do encounter, say, a hungry crag cat or wandering yeti that's come down from the mountains, too bad for you. But the distances aren't huge. So that works to the advantage. There are trails, of course, that connect the towns, but most of them are completely engulfed in winter, buried under snow. A lot of the towns actually get to each other via boat, but most of the lakes have frozen over. And so there's a lot of ice fishing going on, but not a lot of water travel.
Any like dog sleds or things like that?
Dog sleds are a popular choice for those who can afford them, because a dog sled and the dogs, of course, you have to feed the dogs, and that's expensive. And then the sleds themselves are not the cheapest thing. But if you can afford one, it's the best way to go. Now, there is an alternative, something we actually introduced in Rime of the Frostmaiden is some intrepid merchant imported a bunch of axe beaks. And because of their sort of wide splayed toes, they're really good at running across snow. And they also have a thick skin, and their feathers actually provide layers of protection. So they're good beasts of burden, better than mules actually, because of the snow.
Interesting. They're like little fantasy tauntauns.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have your temperamental axe-beak tauntaun with you, and that can carry at least your stuff so that you're not weighted down. Snowshoes, of course, are popular.
And then for those who know, that it spreads out people's weight so that you can walk on top of snow without the risk, or a lesser risk of falling through and getting caught in a drift. Yeah,
yeah. And so Icewind Dale does provide some equipment like that you can't get in the player's handbook.
That's great. What is the makeup of the town? Like you mentioned, there's various people from the southern parts. Are there mostly humans? Are they mostly halflings? Like, what's the kind of makeup of 10 towns?
That's a really good question. So the nature of Icewind Dale is such that it attracts not only adventurous types and frontiers folk, but also people who are looking to get away from whatever trouble haunts them in their life. So it has attracted its fair share of criminals and outlaws and brigands and other sorts. So these people come from all over the realms, as far south as Chult and even farther south than that. Since Icewind Dale is technically on the Sword Coast, any of the lands up and down the coast have basically had explorers land in Icewind Dale and kind of make roots there. So in Icewind Dale, you will find a more diverse population of occupants than you will almost anywhere outside of Waterdeep. And they're human, they're elves, dwarves, halflings, they're everybody. And of course, because all of civilization in Icewind Dale is basically clustered around these 10 towns, all of these races and peoples have come to coexist. Now, some towns have sort of influences, like maybe a large number of settlers from one place ended up in this one town, and you'll see some of that influence still to this day in that town. Like if one place was sort of founded or dominated by Amnian or Tetherian traders, there might be some vestige of that sort of Amnian or Tetherian root still there that you can see either in the architecture or in some of the decoration. If there were visitors from Karatur, which is a land far to the east, that somehow found their way up here through trade or whatever, you'll see that their influence is also here. So there are places in Bryn Shander where you can see a multitude of different cultural influences.
That's really cool. It's a good way to be able to bring in stuff that you've always wanted to bring in, like how
Yes.
I want a Kenku little bit of a settlement, or something, a Tabaxi, and introduce
it would
them
not
to
be
your
out of the
campaign.
ordinary to find. It would not be out of the ordinary to find a Tabaxi, around 10 towns, and they probably fare better than a lot of others because at least they have fur.
That's true.
There are also some indigenous creatures that might end up finding a home in there. For instance, it's not beyond the pale to think that kobolds or goblins might be able to find a home in 10 towns, because people who live in 10 towns basically because they have their own dark pasts and secrets, and they're accustomed to interacting with people who do, they probably wouldn't blink twice at like a goblin who's eked out a life here. If you're willing to come here and you're willing to work on behalf of the town, or trap animals or fish or whatever, people aren't probably going to care too much about your past. In fact, it would probably be impolite to even approach you about your past. Everybody's got secrets in 10 towns.
Yeah, right. That's part of the character, right? No questions asked, as long as you're pulling your weight and contributing to the community, and a lot of that is due to Drist too, right? Like his background, was able to be respected after a while just because of the contributions he made in defending the towns.
Exactly. You can't judge a person by how they look in Icewind Dale. It ultimately doesn't matter when everybody's just kind of on the same level and all just trying to survive day to day and eke out a living. Now, some towns like Lonelywood, for instance, which is a town named after the forest that it sort of rests up against, that town is known for attracting a large criminal element. But again, this isn't a place where people kill each other in the streets. It's all very calm, and everybody there is chill. And just don't ask a lot of questions, and you'll be fine. These people have gone out of their way to start new lives for themselves. They don't want the past drudged up.
That makes sense.
And if you dare drudge it up, then you better be careful, because these people are dangerous.
They didn't want their past brought out for all to see. Yeah.
Right. And frankly, they know that they still have probably enemies somewhere, and they just don't want to be found.
Yeah.
So drawing attention to them isn't helping them, and then ultimately it won't help you, which is why some people do disappear in the Lonelywood forest and you never see them again.
So as a dungeon master, getting Rime of the Frostmaiden, how would you, approach advice or how to create stories with this political makeup that we've been describing?
Well, Rime of the Frostmaiden is a story about isolation and paranoia and secrecy. And I think one of the fun things as a DM is playing with those themes and this sort of loss of identity, or the stripping away of identity. When you're out there, outside, wandering around the snow drifts and the boarded up buildings, and you see somebody walking ahead of you, bundled up in heavy furs and parkas, you don't know who they are. You don't know what they are. It could be 3 kobolds in a trench coat for all you know, the way they're sort of all bundled up. it's all about the mystery of the unknown, and that thing that you think might be a human under all that furs might be something else entirely. And playing with that idea, I think, could be a lot of fun. Also in Icewind Dale, because it's going through a lot and it has been sort of trapped in this long winter, the towns are starting to do things that they wouldn't normally do. Like we've seen in our own real world how things like a pandemic can affect behavior, how, you know, there are some people who are willing to throw grandma under the bus or, you know, let her die for the sake of, you know, their own benefit. Well, you get some of that in 10 towns where, you know, if there's a 10 town, if there's a community that's isolated and feels like the only way they're ever going to get out of the situation is to offer, say, a sacrifice to the Frostmaiden, the sort of god of winter's cruelty, so that she at least shows them an ounce of compassion, they might do something that they wouldn't normally do. They might make a sacrifice to her, and you get to see what happens. That's a fun thing to play with as a DM, is how far can you kind of push things to show what people will do to survive. Right. And that's what it's all about in 10 Towns. It's about survival at any cost.
And hopefully the player characters, when they enter this area, can be a voice of reason, or at least, you know, yes. a you know, not necessarily lawful good, but at least a good force to be like, hey, what you're doing, I know it makes sense, but, you know, we're just new to the situation. This feels not right, and we can do this differently. And, you know,
yeah, it's a case where, you know, there's an opportunity to show true leadership and true heroism in a place like this, and just remind people who have maybe lost this idea or this notion that you have to cling. Even though we're not all characters in D&D are humans, there's humanity, and you don't want to strip too much of that humanity away. Otherwise, you're just predators. You're no better than the Yeti and the Crag Cats who are out there in the blizzards. And if the 10 Towns is going to survive, it has to stick together.
That's a really great thought. And it goes back to someone's definition of what civilization was in anthropologic and archaeological digs, and was when they go back to find a bone that had been healed, and to them that was the definition of when civilization began, and that is somewhat true even in Icewind Dale.
Exactly. In Rime of the Frostmaiden, we describe 10 Towns as the flickering candle lights of civilization. And that's what they are. They're flickering right now. Yeah. And if you don't want them all to go out, that's what the heroes have to do.
Got to burn bright.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. Definitely with a story of isolation and despair. It's nice to have the player characters be that shining light, and hopefully, you know, create some consistent candle burnings in both our world and in Icewind Dale. So,
yes, even as they guard their own secrets.
Exactly. Great. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait for people to get their hands on Rime of the Frostmaiden on September 15th. If people would like to ask you any questions about what's going on in Icewind Dale, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I'm on Twitter at Chris Perkins DND.
Excellent. And I'm looking forward to it. So thanks a lot, Chris.
You're welcome.
Yay.